the rhino, the hippo, water buffalo, zebra, hyena, lion, elephant, warthog, leopard, baboon, teal, guinea, flamingo, ibis, snipe, wildebeest, rowan antelope, Grant's gazelle, Thompson's gazelle, reed buck, gerenuk, kongani, water buck, impala, oryx, greater and lesser kudu, and the preeminently beautiful African sable. This is every animal cited by Ernest Hemingway in his African Safari memoir. The summary. In 1935, Ernest Hemingway and a group of hirelings and hangers-on descended upon Africa to hunt rhinos, sable, kudu, and many of the animals just listed. This chart is a breakdown of everything that was killed on page. Now, that's a lot of dead, but Hemingway himself accounts for comparatively few of these tallies. Now, let me just take a quick minute to explain something here. This, for sure, was sport hunting, no doubt about that. However, they did harvest and eat much of the meat from the animals that they killed. They collected trophies and all that, but whereas today you and I probably would never consider hunting rhinos and collecting the ivory. I mean, it's against the law for one thing, but also the endangered nature of the rhino. But they were following local hunting guidelines at the time. In 1935, it was legal to harvest ivory, so they did. Now, I gotta let you know something here. My AC is kind of on the fritz. It's 80 degrees in my house right now. So if I look a little steamy, it's because it's very hot this summer in my house. Anyway, about the rhinos, they never even considered the fact that rhinos could be hunted to extinction. It's something that never even crosses their mind. Even when Mkola, one of Hemingway's guides, kind of stops and reflects, and they're sitting around the campfire back at camp one night, and he's like, "Where have all the rhinos gone?" It doesn't even cross his mind that it's his work itself and work of others like him that is tearing this population to the ground. There's a passage near the end of the book. This is the book, by the way. Let me pull it over here. This is the book. There's a passage near the end of this book where Hemingway's pulled out 6 empty cartridges, rifle cartridges from his pocket, and he lines them up on the table. And he says to himself, "Simba, Simba, Faro, Nayati, Tandala, Tandala." And Mkola, his guide, hears him say this, and he comes over and he looks down and he says it himself. "Simba, Simba, Faro, Nayati, Tandala, Tandala." In English, that means lion, lion, rhino, buffalo, kudu, kudu. So these cartridges that he has are really the trophies that mean the most to Hemingway. And when he realizes that he's kind of drawn an audience and he's got his trophies laid out in front of him, he says to himself, "That's a hell of a big piece of bragging. That'll hold me for tonight." And maybe these words did hold him for the night. That was enough bragging at the time. But when he got back to America, he wrote this book, Green Hills of Africa. And let me tell you, this for sure is one hell of a big piece of bragging. This is 300 pages of that entire hunt. I'm just going to set this off to the side because it's right in my way here. I can't do my chicken wing dance. The story. Green Hills of Africa is not just a series of self-congratulatory hunting expeditions. It is that, but it's not just that. In the final hunt of the book, the morning following Hemingway lining up the cartridges on the table and recounting his victories in the field, Hemingway is going after the African sable, an animal he's never even seen before, but he's heard tell of its great beauty and what a marvelous trophy it will make. So he's already got 6 trophies, and he's looking for his 7th now with this sable. So with Mkola, Droopy, and most of his retinue in tow, Hemingway goes out in search of the sable, and they don't find one at first, but around midday, they spot 3 of them. Now we could see their horns clearly with the glasses. One, lying down, was certainly much the biggest, and the horns, as I caught them in silhouette, seemed to curve much higher and farther back. I was too excited to be happy as I watched them. I saw one sable looking toward us, then 3 more got to their feet. Then the big one got up and stood broadside with head turned toward us. There was no choice now. They were definitely spooked, and I lay flat on my belly, put my arm through the sling, got my elbows settled and my right toe pushing the ground, and squeezed off on the center of the bull's shoulder. But I knew it was a bad shot. I was over him. They all jumped and stood looking, not knowing where the noise came from. I shot again at the bull, and they were off. I was on my feet and hit him as he ran, and he was down, but he took it, and then he was up and running. Then I hit him again, and he was trailing slowly, and I knew I had him. It's all very exciting, okay? And even me, I'm not a hunter. I still get excited about this, even though this is something I wouldn't in a million years dream of doing. But Hemingway was also excited. He was too excited to be happy. He was also too excited to be accurate, okay? And what he's done now is he's wounded this sable, and now this hunt has turned into an arduous tracking expedition. The sable now were going up the hill in the timber across the valley, spread out and traveling fast. My eyes, my mind, and all inside me were full of the blackness of that sable bull and the sweep of those horns. But it was excited shooting, all of it, and I was not proud of it. I had gotten excited and shot at the whole animal instead of the right place, and I was ashamed. Hemingway is not simply motivated by a desire to kill everything that moves. There's a process and a science behind it, and he's very good at this science. He's very knowledgeable about the process. Yet in his excitement, he lost track of the science, and he gave over to his more base human reaction, which is excitement over the kill. And because of that, he's not proud of himself. When he loses sight of his process, he makes mistakes. We trailed fast up the hillside into the timber. The blood was splashed freely. I drank some water from the canteen. The sun was up now, and it was getting hot. We started across the rocks, quartering up the hillside. There was a very big sable, the hoof marks spread wide, the tracks going up into the timber, and there was blood, plenty of it. Then he took us up and into a rocky ravine-cut country where the trailing was slow and the climbing difficult. The splatters of blood, not so bright now, went on around the boulders, over the rocks and up, and left us on a rim rock ledge. There was no other way to go but down. But how had he gone? And down which ravine? This chase goes on and on and on, and eventually they have to give up because they realize that the blood is drying up and they're falling further and further behind this sable. And now they've come to a place where they're at an impasse. They don't know which way the sable has gone. They know that it has to have gone down, but where? He hasn't wounded this sable mortally, at least not immediately so. And this sable is still on a dead run, and they're losing it. They don't know where he is. So they finally throw in the towel. And upon reflection of his hastiness that has caused him to miss out on the trophy that he was most hopeful to bring home with him from this African safari, this reflection brings about my favorite passage of the book. Our best chance, the only chance a rifleman should ever ask, was when I had a shot, and I shot at the whole animal instead of calling the shot. It was my own lousy fault. I was a son of a bitch to have gut shot him. It came from overconfidence in being able to do a thing and then omitting one of the steps in how it is done. Every damn thing is your fault if you're any good at it. I love that. The extreme ownership of every damn thing is your fault if you're any good at it. But Hemingway's not just talking about hunting here. He's actually talking about something else. Hunting for sure, but something else as well. This is actually a metaphor for something completely different. But a metaphor for what? I'm going to throw a little curveball at you. I think that Ernest Hemingway and Tom Petty would have been pretty good pals. Tom Petty's songwriting philosophy was, don't bore us, get to the chorus. And his songs are super catchy. Now, one thing that Tom Petty and Ernest Hemingway have in common is that they're very direct. Hemingway is probably known as the most direct, least elusive author of his time. And if there's anything at all that's going to disprove my theory that Green Hills of Africa is a metaphor for something other than hunting, it's the fact that Ernest Hemingway is not known for being elusive or using any other kind of pretense to get his point across. But I'm not wrong. Green Hills of Africa is a metaphor, and an elaborate one. Now, we've talked a lot about the middle of the book and the end of the book, and I'm going to take you back to the beginning of the book. Chapter 1 opens up with Hemingway crouched in a hunting blind before a broad salt lick where kudu are licking the salt out of the soil. He's training his rifle on one of the kudu and ready to shoot when a truck backfires a ways up the road. Hemingway emerges from the hunting blind after the kudu scatter. They're startled. They take off. Hemingway emerges. He's frustrated. He's irritated. And he marches up out of the blind, up the road, finds the broken down truck where he meets an Austrian man named Kandinsky. Now, Kandinsky and Hemingway take Hemingway's truck. They go back to the camp. And it's on this drive together where they strike up a bond. They strike upon a common passion for literature. Homer, Joyce, Tolstoy, Twain, James, Poe, Crane, Mann, Emerson, Hawthorne, Whittier, Melville, Valery, Sinclair, Thoreau, Kipling, Moore, White, Rilke, Pound, and Ernest Hemingway. This is every writer cited by Ernest Hemingway in his African Safari memoir. Kandinsky quizzes Hemingway about all kinds of American writers, and in fact, Kandinsky himself has read Hemingway. He didn't realize that the man who he just picked up on the side of the road in Africa was one of his favorite writers. So back at camp, Hemingway and Kandinsky have this conversation. Hemingway said, "Well, we have had in America writers of rhetoric who had the good fortune to find a little in a chronicle of another man, and from voyaging, of how things, actual things, can be. Whales, for instance. And this knowledge is wrapped in the rhetoric like plums in a pudding. Occasionally it is there, alone, wrapped in a pudding, and it is good. This is Melville. But the people who praise it for the rhetoric, which is not important. They put a mystery in, which is not there." Yes, I see. But it is the mind working. It's its ability to work, which matches the rhetoric. Rhetoric is the blue sparks from the dynamo. Sometimes, and sometimes it is only blue sparks. And what is the dynamo driving? After making this point about what we might call purple prose, but in the book it's called blue sparks, Hemingway moves on to the nature of writing and writers. So many, especially American writers of Hemingway's time, he believes have lost their sense of how things can be. And it's due to their found fame and their found fortunes. So Hemingway proposes a stratagem to avoid this drop-off in the quality of your writing once you've found fame and fortune. Writers should work alone. They should see each other only after their work is done, and not too often. Otherwise, they become like writers in New York, all angleworms in a bottle, trying to derive knowledge and nourishment from their own contact with the bottle. They are lonesome outside the bottle. They have to write to keep up their establishments, and they write slop. It is not slop on purpose, but because it is hurried, because they write when there's nothing to say, or no water in the well, because they are ambitious. And so the first point here is that when a writer is working, he should do so privately. I've heard this advice elsewhere in modern times. Only tell people about the book that you've written after it's written. And by all means, share it then and share it with an open heart. But for land's sakes, write it in private. The second point here is to avoid at all costs drinking alcoholically, which unfortunately is something that Hemingway wasn't able to do himself. The third point here is that you need to write for something more than just profit and ambition, because writing for profit and ambition to be a writer, produces nothing but slop. So on point one, I do agree that writers should write alone and that they should come together only briefly. I once ran a writers group. It lasted for a little over 4 years. It was a fantastic addition to my life and it boosted my writing. But when I started writing for the writers group, my writing faltered. When I brought finished works to the writers group, that's when I found the most benefit. So a word of advice when you go to a writers group, don't talk your work to death. Don't defend it. It's okay if people don't understand it. They've only got a small sample. Trust your instincts, okay? Trust your instincts. On point two here, we can see that maybe there's a little bit of hypocritical advice giving here, because Hemingway has also been attributed the quote, write, drunk, edit, sober. And whether that's supposed to be a metaphor or not, whatever. That just shows us how big of a part of drink was in Hemingway's life. But I agree. You should avoid drinking alcoholically. You should just avoid alcohol, but definitely avoid drinking alcoholically, whether you're a writer or doing anything else with your life. On the third point, I could only dream of being faced with the choices of writing for fortune or writing for my art. I wish I had that problem. Right now, I only have the choice of writing for my art or not writing at all. I have never been paid more than a couple of bucks for my writing. Certainly never enough to make any kind of living at it. And definitely not enough to call a fortune. But hopefully, if I'm ever faced with that decision, I'll make the right choice. Whether you're a writer or not, you've been a part of writing groups, you've most certainly come across writers who are obviously writing sheerly out of the ambition of being a writer in the first place. They just want to have written. And some of them don't get past that part. So kudos to the ones who actually do write something. But when that product comes out of ambition, it's very rarely artful. Both of those kinds of writers are dealing in ambition, and it's not a pretty sight. So these 3 points, writing alone, avoiding alcohol, don't write for ambition's sake, are all very much wrapped up in the themes of Green Hills of Africa. He wants to hunt alone, he can't do it drunk, and doing so out of the ambition of the kill messes him up at the end. He has to do it for the love of the process. The process is what gets you through an artful book. Something that sounds beautiful, relays the exciting story, but is rooted in its art, not in its ambition. So point one, Hemingway prefers to hunt alone. He hates it when there's distractions, when people's trucks backfire, or when he has to argue with a guide about which way to go or whatever, right? He wants to hunt alone. But then back at camp, when he's with people, he doesn't mind bringing out the cartridges and sharing with people and bragging a little. But even at the height of his braggadocio, Hemingway recognizes when there's a time to walk away. This is quite enough bragging for me. And he gets up and walks away back to his tent. Point two, on drink. They do drink a little at camp. That's true. But they don't drink to excess at camp. But this metaphor here need not be so literal. Many of the men at camp, the other hunters and the guides, hunted for the wrong things. They were drunk on their legacy. They were drunk on their trophies, and they were drunk on their reputations. And that's what they hunted for. Point three, on writing for the sake of your ambition, is also reflected in this text. Hemingway, whatever we might think of his actions today, was in the age of killing. Okay, and he hunted for the sake of the hunt, for the process, for the science behind it, for the mastery. He wanted to be known as an expert rifleman. He didn't just want to kill animals. And yes, he kept his trophies to brag about later. but that is not why he hunted. Okay, so maybe you're not quite convinced that this book is actually a metaphor, that this isn't actually just a book about hunting and skinning big game, but it's actually a book about writing carefully and editing sharply. So let's go back all the way to page 12, where Hemingway lays out his thesis. The way to hunt is for as long as you live, against as long as there is such and such an animal, just as the way to paint is as long as there is you and colors and canvas, and to write as long as you can live and there is pencil and paper or ink or any machine to do it with, or anything you care to write about, and you feel a fool, and you are a fool to do it any other way. You feel a fool, and you are a fool to do it any other way. And so the connection that Hemingway makes between hunting and writing, right from the outset, couldn't be more clear. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about the current state of their hunt right at the beginning of the book with some metaphorical foreshadowing. At this point in the book, the camp is nervous about the coming raining season and how the rains cause floods, and the floods could get them stranded there if they don't get out in time. So they're trying to make all these very hasty decisions about where to hunt and which salt lick to poach and whatever, right? So Hemingway, obviously our narrator, is reflecting back on that night where he is weary of trying to prioritize this over this. He just wants to be out there and do the damn thing. But here we were, caught by time, by the season, and by the running out of our money, so that what should have been as much fun to do each day, whether you killed or not, was being forced into that perversion of life, the necessity of accomplishing something in less time that should truly be allowed for its doing. Did you catch that? Remember back when Hemingway gut shot the sable and he lost it in the Green Hills, and because he rushed his shot out of excitement and ambition. The sable got away, and he never got another chance at a sable in that hunt. His time in Africa had run out. Also, let me repeat the other line in that section. It says, so that what should have been as much fun to do each day, whether you killed or not, was being forced into the most exciting perversion of life. As much fun to do each day, whether you killed or not. Now, I'm sure that Hemingway didn't kill it every time he sat down to write, okay? But he did it anyway for the love of writing. Pursuing something that gives your life meaning is always time well spent, whether you're killing it or not. Hemingway concludes chapter 1 with a restlessness. Camping during the hunt is not the hunt. Talking about writing is not writing. And while bullshitting each other back at camp about the hunt from the day, or at your writer's group about what you wrote at your writer's desk, it's all part of life. It provides richness to life. Talking about a thing is not doing the thing. For that matter, writing about a thing is not the thing either. You got to live your life. You got to do the damn thing. Ultimately, what Hemingway is talking about in Green Hills of Africa is that living life is a precursor to writing about life. And writing about life is a precursor to sharing that work with other people. So anyway, I can't sit here all day talking about reading. I need to read. And on that note, I have been Eric Gronsky. This has been a video about the Green Hills of Africa. And until next time, read something good. Now, I'm going to read. You can click off anytime you want. With the clean feeling of a dry shirt, fresh socks, and a change of boots, I sat on the petrol case and drank a whiskey and water while I waited for Droopy to start out. I felt certain I was going to have a shot at a bull, and I wanted to take the edge off so I would not be nervous. Also, I wanted to not catch a cold. Also, I wanted the whiskey for itself because I loved the taste of it, and because being as happy as I could be, it made me feel even better. It was after 5 when we struck off across the maize field and down to the stream, crossing where it narrowed in a high grass 100 yards above the dam, and then walking slowly and carefully, we went up the grassy bank on the far side, getting soaked to the waist as we stooped going through the wet grass and bracken. After a long stretch of the million-mile country, The country began to open out into dry, sandy, bush-bordered prairies, with the occasional patches of bush where there was water. We watched for bulls that we knew lived in this bush, but the sun was high now, and we saw nothing. Finally, the road began to lift gradually into the hills again, low, blue-wooded hills, now a little thicker than orchard bush in the most perfect country I'd ever seen. Ahead, a pair of high, heavy timberland hills that were big enough to be mountains. We headed up a pebbly, boulder-filled, dry stream bed overgrown with vines and brush, so that climbing, you walked, stooping even in a steep tunnel of vines and foliage. I sweated so that it soaked through my shirt and undergarments, and when we came out to the shoulder of the mountain and stood, looking down at the band of clouds quilting over the entire valley below us, the morning breeze chilled me. I was too wet with sweat to sit down, and we kept going. We went around on one side of the mountain, doubled back on a higher grade, and crossed over out of the sun that was drying my wet shirt and along the top of a series of grassy valleys, stopping to search thoroughly with the field glasses. Finally, we came to a sort of amphitheater, a bowl-like valley of very green grass, with a small stream down the middle and the timber along the far side and the lower edge. We sat in the shallow against some rocks, out of any breeze, watching with glasses as the sun rose and lighted on the opposite slopes, seeing a bull moving and quickly browsing, then head-lifted, long-staring vigilance of all browsing animals in the forest. Animals on a plain can see very far and have confidence and feed in very different ways. He moved into the reeds out of sight for a long time. There was a whooshing snort and no movement, not a stir in the reeds. Then there was crashing further away, and we could see the reeds swaying with the rush of something through them toward the opposite bank. Then he went up, the quick-moving climbing rush up the other bank, his neck up and out, his head horn-heavy, his wither rounded like a fighting bull in his fast, strong-legged climb. I followed Droopy into the thick, tall grass that was 5 feet above our heads, walking carefully on the game trail, stooping forward, trying to make no noise breathing. The old bull had come out of the bush, groggy as he was, and I could see the horns, the boss coming far down, the muzzle out, the little eyes, the roll of fat and muscle on his neck, the heavy power and the rage in him, and I admired him and respected him. I was watching, freezing myself deliberately inside, stopping the excitement as you close a valve, going to that impersonal state you shoot from. He showed, trotting into the shallow boulder-filled stream. In shooting large animals, there is no reason ever to miss if you have a clear shot, and can shoot, and know where to shoot. But instead of that sweet, clean pull of the Springfield with the smooth, unhesitant release at the end, this trigger came to what, in a squeeze, seemed metal stuck against metal. It was like when you shoot in a nightmare. I corrected from my flinch. I got on him then, and well ahead of him, and squeezed off. I hear the whoosh of the bullet, and the bull seemed to explode forward. But instead of that sweet, clean pull of the Springfield with the smooth, unhesitant release at the end, this trigger came to what, in a squeeze, seemed metal stuck against metal. It was like when you shoot in a nightmare. I corrected from my flinch. I got on him then, and well ahead of him, and squeezed off. I hear the whoosh of the bullet, and the bull seemed to explode forward. He crashed ahead, splashing water and snorting as he went crashing into the grass. He jumped like a bucking horse as he came out of the chutes, and I threw the shell, slammed the bolt forward, and shot again. I knew I had him. Absolutely, I got him. But when we came to him lying on his side, his heart was still beating strongly, although to all appearances he was dead. Droopy had lost his knife, and I had the skinning knife to stick him with. I felt for the heart behind the foreleg with my fingers, and feeling it beating under the hide, slipped the knife in. I felt around and cut the big artery, and the blood came hot against my fingers. Once bled, I opened him with the knife, still showing off to Droopy, and emptying the bull neatly, took out the liver, cut away the gall, laying the liver on a hummock of grass with the kidney beside it. I enjoyed, as always, my fast, clean, delicate scalping with the knife. The cape all clear and spread back, I knocked through the connection of the skull and the spine, and then, twisting, swung the head loose and lifted it, cape and all, free from the neck, the cape hanging heavily and wet in the late daylight that shone on my red hands and on the dirty khaki of my tunic. Droopy cut a switch from the tree and sewed the stomach together with the withe so that the tripe made a bag to carry the other delicacies in. He put the bag on the end of the switch, running it through the flaps, and I put it over my shoulder in a way that tramps carried their property on a handkerchief on the end of a stick. We went on into the camp, the boys around the cooking fire, all laughing at the tripe bag over my shoulder as we came in. This was the kind of hunting that I liked. I was completely happy.